Welcome to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're jumping into the really dynamic world of philanthropy.
Yeah, it's definitely changing.
We've gathered a whole stack of, well, fascinating articles and reports. We want to explore how giving is evolving, especially
Mm.
thinking about, getting the next generation involved, and this growing movement towards trust-based approaches.
And we're adding a specific lens on Africa too, right? Seeing the innovation happening there.
Exactly. So our sources, they cover quite a range. We've got insights from philanthropy together on youth engagement, mostly U.S. focused there.
Right. And then there's the African Youth Philanthropy Network, AYPN. They're doing crucial work fostering giving among young Africans, a really key player.
We also looked at Think Global Health, their perspective on community-centered philanthropy in African public health.
Plus a report from Dahlberg
Yeah.
and the African Philanthropy Forum. That one digs into how African philanthropy really stepped up during COVID-19.
And then several pieces zeroing in on trust-based philanthropy, what it is, why it matters, the impact.
Yeah, from Community Foundations of Canada, Bridgespan, even a look at the basic definition in history.
Okay, so that's the material. Our mission today, really, is to pull out the key shifts. Understand how young people are becoming, well, more central, and how these newer models, like trust-based giving, are gaining traction, especially how all this is shaping philanthropy in Africa.
Sounds good. Where should we start? Youth seems like a natural place.
Agreed. Let's start with the sheer energy and potential young people are bringing.
The numbers are pretty stark, actually. Philanthropy Together pointed out back in 2019, young people, say 10 to 19, they were 13% of the U.S. population.
Wow, 13%, that's significant. Over 41 million.
It is. And what's really interesting is that over 55% of those aged 12 to 19, they're already doing something. Volunteering, activism.
So they're already engaged. It's not like we have to convince them from scratch.
Exactly. There seems to be this, inherent desire to contribute.
Yes.
So the insight maybe is that philanthropy needs to channel that, empower what's already there.
Focus on the issues they're already passionate about, perhaps.
Precisely.
But that still leaves a big chunk, that other 45%. And how do we empower the whole generation within this space? The sources had some really interesting strategies.
They did.
One thing that jumped out was just giving them real platforms, letting their voices be heard.
That's so critical. There was that example with U.S. Bank at the University of Minnesota.
Right.
After George Floyd's murder.
Right.
They didn't just talk. They created workshops, let students discuss the issues, and then actually gave them grants, $25,000 to fund their own solutions.
That's real empowerment, not just listening, but funding their ideas.
Yeah, tangible change driven by them.
And then there's this idea of giving circles. That seems like such a practical way to learn about collective impact.
It really is. Giving circles create this space. Young people get together, talk about what matters to them, pool their money, maybe small amounts individually, but together it's significant.
And they decide together where it goes.
Exactly. And philanthropy. Together stressed, it's not just about the money. It builds skills. Communication, making decisions as a group, budgeting.
Practical life skills, really.
Yeah. And it can even help bridge generational gaps. Families talking about values, about giving.
That makes sense. I also liked the point about creative volunteering. It's not always about the traditional soup kitchen model, right?
Not at all. Think about big campus days of service with lots of different options. Or maybe programs involving travel, seeing different issues firsthand.
Experiences that spark something personal.
Exactly. Broaden horizons, create a connection. That can naturally lead to wanting to give more formally later on.
And bringing it into schools.
Yeah.
Weaving philanthropy into the curriculum itself. That feels foundational.
Definitely. If you start discussing the history of giving, social justice movements, right there in the classroom, it just becomes a normal part of understanding the world.
Like that Valparaiso University program mentioned, students identifying issues, then taking action.
Yeah, making it part of the educational experience. It demystifies it.
It seems obvious when you say it, but connecting philanthropy to the issues young people already care about. BLM, #MeToo, climate.
That makes it relevant. Instantly. It's not some abstract thing their parents do. It's about their world.
Supporting local grassroots groups working on those issues seems key.
Absolutely. That's where the energy often is. And we shouldn't forget the simpler things, too, like family conversations.
Right, just talking about giving, about values within families, breaking down those barriers.
And mentorship, connecting young people with folks already working in nonprofits or foundations.
Offering guidance, showing pathways.
For sure. But maybe the bottom line, like Philanthropy Together said, is inclusion. Young people want to be in it.
Not just talked at or designed for.
Exactly. They want a voice, a real seat at the table, especially when decisions affect their lives. It's collaboration with them.
Okay, so that's a strong picture of youth engagement, especially from that U.S. perspective. Now let's shift focus. Africa. The landscape there sounds, well, different. Richer in some ways.
It really is.
Yeah.
The AYPN paper makes a strong case that you can't just use standard Western definitions for philanthropy in Africa.
How so?
Well, it includes all these indigenous, often informal community support systems, things with deep historical roots. That exists right alongside the more formal institutional philanthropy we might recognize.
So African philanthropy is a distinct concept.
Very much so. It has its own characteristics, its own approaches. And understanding that is crucial.
And youth philanthropy is especially vital there.
Hugely significant. Africa has this incredibly young and rapidly growing population. The UN highlights how critical investing in youth is for sustainable development across the continent.
They're literally the future drivers of change.
Absolutely. A massive demographic force for social and economic progress.
And the African Youth Philanthropy Network, AYPN, they're right in the middle of this.
They are. Their whole mission is supporting youth-led projects, building a culture of giving among young Africans.
They had that big conference in Accra back in 2022.
That's right. A key outcome was developing a 4-year strategic plan focused on people, participation, policy, and practice. The 4 Ps.
Sounds comprehensive. It also seems like being involved in philanthropy itself helps young people develop.
Oh, definitely. The research shows it. Participating in these kinds of programs builds really practical skills.
Like what?
Data analysis, believe it or not, financial literacy, teamwork, public speaking. Plus, it just fosters a stronger sense of community connection.
And brings their unique perspectives into organizations.
Which enriches decision-making, absolutely.
Okay, so we've got the who, the rising importance of youth. Now let's talk how. These evolving models, trust-based philanthropy is generating a lot of buzz.
It really is. The Community Foundations of Canada fact sheet, the Bridgespan article, they both frame it as a strategy to tackle power imbalances.
Power imbalances between funders and the nonprofits they support.
Exactly. And ultimately, the communities they both serve. The goal is to redistribute that power, create a healthier, more equitable space for nonprofits to actually do their work.
And this became even more obvious during the pandemic, right? The limits of old models.
For sure. Traditional philanthropy often means tight restrictions on funds, project grants that don't flex, really heavy reporting.
Which can stifle innovation or just the ability to react quickly.
Right. Trust-based philanthropy flips that. It emphasizes unrestricted funding, often multi-year, simplified paperwork, transparency, responsiveness, listening to grantees.
So if a funder wants to move in this direction, what are the practical steps?
Well, the Community Foundations of Canada piece, citing the Beak Center, talks about starting internally, building a trust-oriented culture.
Looking at your own practices.
Yeah, asking, what are we doing that might actually be reinforcing bad power dynamics? It might mean retraining staff, focusing on building real relationships with grantees and communities.
And really listening, deeply listening.
That's core, going beyond surveys. Truly understanding community needs and priorities, and crucially, maybe even bringing community members into the decision-making process.
Sharing the power to decide where money goes.
Exactly. And investing in building the community's capacity to lead that process themselves.
Bridgespan also laid out those 6 core principles, didn't they, from the Stanford Social Innovation Review article?
Yes, those are key. Let's see. Multi-year unrestricted funding is number 1. Stability, flexibility.
Okay.
Then doing the homework up front on grantees so you're not constantly hounding them later.
Makes sense. Less burden.
Simplify the paperwork applications, reports, be transparent and responsive, actually solicit feedback and act on it.
Don't just ask for it and file it away.
Right. And finally, offer support beyond the check. Use your networks, your expertise, if it's genuinely helpful.
It really does sound like a fundamental shift from that top-down, funder knows best model.
It is. It's moving towards partnership, mutual trust, shared accountability. The Wikipedia entry noted how COVID really accelerated this.
Right. Over 800 organizations signed that pledge in 2020.
Yeah, and the Johnson Center flagged it as a key trend that year, too. It gained serious momentum.
But what about accountability? If funding is unrestricted, how do funders know it's having an impact? That's a question that must come up.
It definitely does. It's a valid concern. But the trust-based approach argues for different ways to track impact.
Right.
Like open dialogue, honest conversations with grantees, simplified reporting focused on learning and progress, not just ticking boxes. It's finding a balance between trust and ensuring good work is happening.
Okay, let's bring this back to Africa again. How did philanthropy there respond during a massive crisis like COVID? What can we learn?
The Dahlberg and African Philanthropy Forum report is really insightful here. They found that actually a lot of African philanthropists increased their giving in 2020.
Really? During all that uncertainty?
Yeah, and a big chunk of their budgets went directly to COVID response.
What were the priorities?
Initially, very immediate health needs, PPE, testing. But then, as the pandemic dragged on, it shifted.
To the economic side.
Exactly,
Yeah.
supporting small businesses that were getting hammered and addressing food insecurity that became a huge, urgent focus for many.
And the local knowledge aspect must have been crucial then.
Absolutely critical. With travel bans and lockdowns, international groups were limited. Local philanthropists understood the context, had the relationships. They knew the hyperlocal impacts,
Their trust and networks were already in place.
which meant they could act fast and effectively.
So what were the key advantages of African philanthropy in that crisis?
The Dahlberg report highlights three things mainly. Local relevance, they knew what was needed where. Speed, they could move quickly. And innovation, they were willing to try new things to meet the challenges.
Mobilizing resources fast, taking some risks.
Exactly, piloting new approaches tailored to their specific communities.
That report also talked about 5 systemic shifts for the future of philanthropy. These sound really relevant.
They really are. The first is that shift in power towards beneficiaries, centering their perspectives.
Okay.
Second, embracing digital-first approaches. Third, embedding resilience into everything, preparing for future shocks.
Makes sense.
Fourth, strategic flexibility needs to be a core skill. And fifth, moving beyond transactional short-term partnerships towards deeper relationships.
That phrase they used, dynamic localism, seems to capture a lot of that.
It really does. It's about being agile, working collaboratively with local partners, building capacity within communities, using existing local structures and knowledge.
And it feels like trust-based philanthropy aligns really well with that dynamic localism idea.
Absolutely. Empowering local actors, building genuine partnerships. It fits hand in glove. The trust-based philanthropy project itself is all about funders learning from each other how to do this, how to redistribute power.
And it's crucial to remember, trust isn't just about the money itself.
No, not at all. Bridgespan makes that point well. It includes non-monetary support, leveraging everyone's strengths, funder and grantee.
They drew that parallel with private investment.
Yeah, where investors often provide expertise alongside capital, aiming for long-term value. It's an interesting comparison for philanthropy.
It makes you think, what is the funder's value add beyond the cash?
Exactly. And Bridgespan challenges funders to ask that honestly.
Yeah.
Is your involvement helping or hindering? Recognize the expertise that nonprofit leaders already have.
Which ultimately means shifting mindsets on both sides.
It's a big shift. It means questioning long-held beliefs about control, about risk, about relationships. Bridgespan even brings in ideas from faith traditions, feminist theory, looking at power dynamics.
And being aware of how we build trust, those 3 pathways they mentioned.
Right. Process-based, fair systems, institution-based reputation, and characteristic-based gut feeling about someone.
And the warning about that last one, characteristic-based trust.
Yeah, the potential for bias there. Relying on who looks trustworthy can really disadvantage leaders of color. Funders need to be super conscious of that.
So bringing this all together,
Yeah.
it definitely feels like philanthropy is at a really interesting, maybe pivotal moment.
I think so.
Yeah.
You see this clear momentum towards engaging youth more meaningfully. You see the rise of African-led initiatives grounded in local realities, and you see this growing adoption of trust-based models that are trying to build more equitable, more effective partnerships.
It's been a fascinating deep dive, really connecting these threads. It leaves you thinking, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How might these trends actually reshape not just the big foundations, but how all of us think about giving, how individuals, communities contribute to change?
It really forces you to reflect on those power dynamics in giving.
And the potential for collaborations that are genuinely more inclusive and maybe, just maybe, more impactful because of it.
A powerful thought.
So the question for you listening might be, what role can you play in encouraging these shifts? No matter how big or small your own involvement might be, something to definitely chew on.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.